The Secret of Success, or How to Get On in the World, with some remarks upon true and false success and the art of making the best use of life, by W.H. Davenport Adams. 1879 edition, New York, publisher G.P. Putnam's Sons. Chapter 1. Time and its Uses. The commodity of which every man has the least, and generally speaking, wastes the most, is time. When we consider how small is the portion allotted to us, we cannot but wonder at the carelessness with which men expend it. Of all the trite themes touched by moralists and poets, the tritest is the shortness of life. Life, we are told, is a bubble, a shifting dream, a thing of naught, evanescent as a morning mist, uncertain as a young maid's promise, brittle as a reed, and yet men proceed to deal with it as if it were inexhaustible as the widow's cruse of oil, as if it were as sure and stable as the foundations of the everlasting hills. There is something very curious and very pitiable in this. When we see the waste of time which goes on around us, we cannot but marvel whether the teachings of sages and divines and the lessons of centuries of experience have been of any avail, whether men have even yet learned to realize how precious a thing it is, how solemn a responsibility it brings with it, how great a trust it puts into their hands. Does this waste arise from want of thought, or from a want of a sense of duty? The two causes are closely connected and may very well exert a combined influence. It is difficult to believe that the great majority of time wasters are inspired by feelings of recklessness and desperation, are in a feverish hurry to consume as rapidly and as waywardly as possible the precious treasure committed to their charge. Their folly is doubtless due to an unwillingness or an inability to reflect, and to the absence of high purposes and lofty motives. In most cases, they have not been taught how to value time or how to use it. What they should do with that which is their real wealth, our children never learn. We provide them with instruction in the various branches of a polite education. We open up to them the regions of art and science. We guide them sedulously in the flowery paths of literature. But we do not teach them how to employ and economize their time. We don't impress upon them the value of the minutes. Take care of the minutes, and the days will take care of themselves. It is astonishing how much raw material is allowed to run to waste in every school. Precious quarters of an hour are thrown aside which might be turned to excellent account, and thus the young grow accustomed to a thoughtless and unprofitable expenditure. They find too frequently the same waste at home. Time is squandered before and after meals, in the morning, in the evening, upstairs and downstairs, in the bedroom and the dining room and the drawing room. And at the end of each day the burden is, this should have been done and has been left undone. That should have been remembered and has been forgotten. But never mind, we will make up for lost time tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow. We venture to say that no other word in our language has to answer for so much sin and folly, for so many broken vows, so many blighted hopes, so many neglected duties, so many wrecked lives. For the worst of it is, tomorrow never comes. It is always today and yesterday. The yesterday we can never recall, can never take up and absorb into today. When once it is dead, let it lie. There is nothing more to be done but to shed a tear on its grave and turn to the today. Some people, be it said, waste a good deal of time in grieving over the time they waste. In other words, they spend the day in fretting over the useless yesterday. It is said of the Emperor Titus that when he had done no good deed in the course of a day, he would exclaim, Perdidi diem. The lament was natural, but be it remembered, he did not wait until the morrow to make it, and he did not fail to turn the today to better account by professing his regret over the yesterday that had gone out so blankly. We desire to advocate a constant recollection of the inestimable values of minutes, but not a vain yearning after those that can never be recovered. Men become great and good just as they understand how to make use of their time. The most brilliant genius avails its possessor nothing if he do not seize his opportunities, and opportunities never occur to the spendthrift. The hour he wastes may be the very hours that would have ensured his success. Therefore, it is at the outset of the present volume we seek to enforce on its readers the necessity of economizing time, of turning every minute to the best advantage. This seems to us the very first lesson to be learned by a young man who honestly desires to do his duty towards his God and his neighbor. Let him not trouble himself about his talents or his means. He can at least say with the celebrated Italian that time is his estate, and his first care must be to understand its proper cultivation. We think it is Horace Mann who suggests that most young men, and we fear too many of riper years, might daily put forth some such melancholy notice as the following: Lost, yesterday, somewhere between sunrise and sunset, 2 golden hours, each one worth 60 diamond minutes. No reward is offered, for they are gone forever. Gone forever. In these words lies the sting of the moralist. Bitter jest. What more deplorable sight can there be than that too common one of the unfortunate who has lost, in other words, wasted a golden hour at the beginning of the day, and for the rest of the 24 hour is fruitlessly endeavoring to overtake it? Why, it is gone irrevocably, like the empire of the Pharaohs, like the wisdom of the Chaldeans, like the old man's youth, like last year's summer sunshine. It would be easier to rebuild the temple palaces of Karnak than to recover it. And hence it happens that people are incessantly complaining of want of time. It is astonishing how much good not done is ideally attributed to this cause. We know persons who, according to their own account, would surpass John Howard in philanthropy if they had but the time, would visit the sick and relieve the poor, and comfort the widow and the fatherless in their affliction if they had but the time. There are others who would become modern Magliabecis by virtue of their erudition, would carve out for themselves a way to fame or fortune, would benefit the world by discoveries in science or art if they had but the time. Listen to their complaints, and you would believe that every moment is charged with some imperative duty or necessary occupation, that it is want of time and not its misuse that throws them so hopelessly out of the world's race. The truth is that method makes time. The old adage runs, a place for everything and everything in its place. It would be wiser to say, a time for everything and everything in its time. And if we mix and muddle our hours as some men mix and muddle their papers, no good result can be anticipated. A careful appointment of the hours is the first step towards a successful employment of them. We do not ask the reader to enthrall himself in an intolerable bondage. Time must be his servant, and not he the slave of time. But he should be guided by certain fixed rules and allow of no causeless deviation from them. One man will be found to accomplish in a day as much as another man accomplishes in a week. Inquiry will show that difference is due not so much to the greater power of intellect or greater quickness of apprehension as to better application of time. The successful person never talks of leisure because he never has any. He has for every hour its proper task. It is only the idler who has leisure, leisure for small talk, for idle pleasures, for trivial amusements, for hopes and fears and regrets. He has so much leisure that he never has any time for work. There is such an element of expansion in leisure that unless carefully repressed and limited, it will before long absorb a man's whole life. Like the monster that Frankenstein created, it soon defies the control of its master. Leisure, how in this busy human life of ours can any serious mind find space for it? Unhappy is he who has an hour or two to spare. We may be sure that he has never learned the value of time, nor the necessity of economizing it. The world owes much to the men who have made the best of every minute. Such men have been its leaders of thought, its great discoverers, its poets, its essayists, its doers of good. They have known how to utilize those odd half hours and spare quarters which ordinary persons treat with so little consideration. They have never suffered a minute to pass without levying toil upon it. As Cuvier rolled in his carriage from place to place, he read and thought, and the sum of that reading and thinking swelled his researches in comparative anatomy. While walking to and from the dusty office where he occupied a stool of a lawyer's clerk, Henry Kirke White acquired a knowledge of Greek. Dr. Mason's excellent translation of the great metaphysical poem of Lucretius was composed during his early journeys to his numerous patients. A German physician, in the same way, contrived to commit to memory the Iliad of Homer. Sir Matthew Hale, while travelling as a judge on circuit, prepared his thoughtful and well-weighed contemplations. Dr. Darwin's curious scientific poems were jotted down on little bits of paper as his carriage conveyed him from house to house. These men acted on the poet's admonition. Think not a trifle, though it small appear, small sands the mountain, moments make the year, and trifles life. When those trifles are minutes, wise men pick them up. Hugh Miller, while working as a stonemason, made such good use of his that he learned to write a style of remarkable fluency and vigor. The Chancellor d'Aguesseau translated the Greek Testament in the quarters of an hour which his wife wasted before dinner. Elihu Burritt, the learned blacksmith, improved to such good purpose the odds and ends of time that fell to his disposal as to gain a mastery of 18 languages and 22 dialects. Equally expert in the utilization of unconsidered moments was the late Charles Kingsley, whose multifarious knowledge was acquired by his tact in seizing on every opportunity. Robertson of Brighton was also a stern economist of time, and vigilantly looked after those spare minutes which most of us throw away without a pang of remorse. Franklin's hours of study were stolen from the time that should have been given to meals and sleep, and though we do not recommend the practice, we think better of it than of the habit of stealing the too long time for meal and sleep from the hours that should be devoted to work. We are now old, said Pierre Nicole to Arnauld. Is it not time to rest? Rest, was the grave reply. Have we not all eternity to rest in? This has been the principle of conduct of all great thinkers and doers. They have methodized and economized their time so as to get out of it the most that they could, knowing that rest was not for time but for eternity. They have suffered nothing to pass by unheeded. They have anticipated or remembered the language of Goethe. Do not wait for extraordinary opportunities, but make use of common situations. A long continued walk is better than a short flight. Never be unemployed, says John Wesley. never be triflingly employed, never while away time. An admirable maxim, if not too sternly enforced, if not converted into an oppressive law. We add this caution because wholesome recreation may sometimes be the best way of employing an odd quarter of an hour. We are recommending the economy of time, but we are not unwilling that the economy should include a rational amount of mental refreshment. We are the enemies of leisure, but we do not want every hour to be spent in exactly the same way and exactly the same expenditure of brain power. A man should always be learning, but not unfrequently he may learn most when least thinking of it. Every kind of knowledge, it has been justly said, comes into play some time or other, not only that which is systematic and methodized, but that which is fragmentary, even the odds and ends, the merest rag or tag of information. Single facts, anecdotes, expressions recur to the mind, and by the power of association, just in the right place. Many of these are laid in during what we think are idlest days. All that fund of matter which is used allusively in similitudes or illustrations is collected in diversions from the path of hard study. He will do best in this line whose range has been the widest and freest. A man may study so much by rule as to lose all this, just as one may ride so much in the highway as to know nothing that is off the road. The occupations of our childhood are frequently found to color and influence our later life. As Cowley puts it, they are like letters engraved on the bark of a young tree, which grow and enlarge as the tree does. What sits by the fireside with eyes intent upon the cover of the tea kettle uplifted by the expansive force of steam, and receives an impulse and an impression which guide him in his after pursuits, until he gives to the world his great gift of the steam engine. The boy Smeaton climbs to the roof ridge of his father's barn to erect upon it the tiny windmill he had modelled, foreshadowing, as it were, the boldness of invention which produced the Eddystone lighthouse. Conington, at the age of 6, sleeps with his Bible under his pillow, that he may begin to read it as soon as he wakes. 2 years later, he amuses himself by comparing different versions of Virgil. When he reaches 13, he exhausts his pocket money in buying a copy of Sotheby's Homer. The late Professor Maudsley displays the controversial spirit in the nursery, and as the advocate of free will, disputes with his nurse, whom he considers to have been led away by a sophistical curate. At 13, he writes to his mother, "I have gone into Lucretius, a book full of odd opinions and deistical notions." In short, he is called the deistical poet. But as many of his opinions have long ago been refuted, you need be in no fear of my getting them into my head, especially as many of them seem to be absurd. Tournefort leaves his college class and wanders into the lone meadows, gathering their plants and flowers. He is laying the foundation of a great system of botany. Count Zinzendorf, the founder of the Moravians, when a boy at school, founds a little society which he calls the Order of the Grain of Mustard Seed, and of which the badge is a gold ring inscribed with the words, "None of us liveth to himself." Cowley in his mother's parlour pores over the enchanted pages of the Fairy Queen, and derives the inspiration which makes him in after years a poet. Opie, the Cornish artist, watches a companion drawing a butterfly, and thence receives the bias which leads him onward to a distinguished reputation. In the parlour window of the old mossy vicarage, where Coleridge spent his dreamy childhood, lay a well-thumbed copy of that volume of Oriental fancy, the Arabian Nights, and he has told us with what mingled desire and apprehension he was wont to look at the precious book, until the morning sunshine had touched and illuminated it, while seizing it hastily, he would carry it off in triumph to some leafy nook in the vicarage garden, and plunge directly into its maze of marvels and enchantments. It is recorded of Dr. Johnson that in his boyhood, believing that his brother had hidden some apples beneath a large folio which reposed among the dust and cobwebs of an upper shelf in his father's shop, he clambered thither to effect a capture. The apples were not forthcoming, but the folio, which proved to be the works of Petrarch, attracted his attention, and its perusal awoke in him his dormant literary tastes. That the child is father of the man was shown by the early occupations of Macaulay. He was only 8 years old when his mother wrote of him. He gets on wonderfully in all branches of his education, and the extent of his reading and of the knowledge he has derived from it are truly astonishing. To give you some idea of the activity of his mind, I will mention a few circumstances. He took it into his head to write a compendium of universal history about a year ago, and he really contrived to give a tolerably connected view of the leading events from the creation to the present time, filling about a quire of paper. He told me one day that he had been writing a paper which Henry Daly, a friend of his father's, was to translate into Malabar, to persuade the people of Travancore to embrace the Christian religion. On reading it, I found it to contain a very clear idea of the leading facts and doctrines of that religion, with some strong arguments for its adoption. He was so fired with reading Scott's Lay and Marmion, the former of which he got entirely, and the latter almost entirely by heart, merely from his delight in reading them, that he determined on writing a poem in 6 cantos, which he called the Battle of Cheviot. After he had finished about 3 of the cantos, of about 120 lines each, which he did in a couple of days, he became tired of it. I make no doubt he would have finished his design, but as he was proceeding with it, the thought struck him of writing an heroic poem to be called Olaus the Great, or the Conquest of Mona, in which, after the manner of Virgil, he might introduce in prophetic song the future fortunes of the family. Among others, those of the hero who aided in the fall of the tyrant of Mysore, after having long suffered from his tyranny, and of another of the race who had exerted himself for the deliverance of the wretched Africans. He has just begun it. He has composed I know not how many hymns. Such was Macaulay in his childhood, and such he was in his manhood. No man ever economized his time more wisely or more diligently sought every opportunity of adding to his accumulation of knowledge. In nearly every book on this subject that has come under our notice, the example of Sir William Jones, the famous Oriental scholar, has been adduced, and trite as it is, its force of application is such that we are disposed to revive it in these pages. To such good purpose did he use his minutes, so few did he waste, that before he was 20 years of age, he had acquired a complete acquaintance with Greek and Latin, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and had also made considerable progress in Arabic and Persian. His successful economy of time and his ceaseless pursuit of knowledge eventually elevated him to a seat in the Supreme Court of Indian judicature. His biographers have remarked with interest how carefully he allotted to each hour the work appropriate for it, how precise he was in his methodical division of labour. The great lawyer of James I's reign, Sir Edward Coke, had portioned out his days as follows: 6 hours in sleep, in law's grave studies 6, 4 spent in prayer, the rest on nature fix. Sir William adopted a distribution much more earnestly to be commended: 7 hours to law, to soothing slumbers 7, 10 to the world allot, and all to heaven. The reader will not be displeased with the wise and discriminating remarks which the career of the distinguished Orientalist suggested to Lord Jeffrey. From the very commencement, he says, he appears to have taxed himself very highly, and having in early youth set before his eyes the standard of a noble and accomplished character in every department of excellence, he seems never to have lost sight of this object of emulation, and never to have remitted his exertions to elevate and conform himself to it in every particular. Though born in a condition very remote from affluence, he soon determined to give himself the education of a finished gentleman, and not only to cultivate all the elegance and refinement implied in that appellation, but to carry into the practice of an honourable profession all the lights and ornaments of philosophy and learning, and extending his ambition beyond the attainment of mere literary or professional eminence, to qualify himself for the management of public affairs, and to look forward to the higher rewards of patriotism, virtue, and political skill. The perseverance and exemplary industry, continues Lord Jeffrey, with which he laboured to carry out his magnificent plan, and the distinguished success attending the accomplishment of all that part of it which the shortness of his life permitted him to execute, afford an instructive lesson to all who may be inclined by equal diligence to deserve an equal reward. The more we learn, indeed, of the early history of those who have bequeathed a great name to posterity, the more shall we be persuaded that no substantial or permanent excellence can ever be attained without much pains, labour, and preparation, and that extraordinary talents are less necessary to the most brilliant success than perseverance and application. Time is money, says the proverb. If some people we know were of the same opinion, how careful they would be of it. But it is also happiness and peace of mind, and the fulfillment of the divine commission entrusted to us at birth. It is in truth the chief good upon earth, if we do but know how to make it so. For be it remembered, time is exactly what we make of it. In the hands of the wise a blessing, in the hands of the foolish a curse, in the hands of the wise a preparation for life eternal, in the hands of the foolish a preparation for the condemnation that is everlasting. To you it is much, to your neighbour it is naught. He is as anxious to throw it away as you, we hope, are anxious to cultivate it to the greatest advantage. Ah, if all of us did but know what it is, what it signifies, what it might be, how we should watch over every grain in the hourglass, how great would be our activity, how solicitous our labour, how profound our consciousness of duty, how we should aspire to avail ourselves of each passing moment, how keen would our regret if conscience could speak to us of days wasted and opportunities neglected. In commenting on the importance of thrift in regard to time, it would be easy to lay down a few practical and familiar rules for the benefit of the young adventurer in life's checkered career. As for instance, one thing at a time, do at once what ought to be done at once. Never put off till tomorrow what ought to be done today. Never leave to another that which you can do yourself. More haste, worse speed. Stay a little that we may make an end the sooner. But more is to be learned from example than precept, and the lives of great men and of men good and great will prove of higher and more lasting value to the student than the most precious fragments of proverbial philosophy. Show me a man who has attained to eminence or excellence, and you show me a man who has economized his time. Show me a man who has benefited the world by his wisdom, or his country by his patriotism, or his neighborhood by his philanthropy, and you show me a man who has made the best of every minute. In business, the men who have attained success are the men who have known the importance of method, the men who have appreciated the potentiality of time. Of Tours, the wealthy New Orleans shipowner, it is said that he was as methodical and regular as a clock, and that his neighbours were in the habit of judging of the time of the day by his movements. Of William Gray, the Boston merchant, who owned at one time upwards of 60 large ships, we read that For upwards of 50 years he arose at dawn and was ready for the work of the day before others had roused him from his slumbers. These are the men who make prize of the world and all it has to give. These are the men who have coined minutes into hours and hours into days. These are the men who are always doing much in order that they may be able to do a little more.